So again, I'll mention, I keep harping on this, Prairie Mountain does not have great landings. It's very challenging in all but the best conditions. Tight valleys, lots of trees, no big flat fields. Okay, welcome to the first site video in the Site Guide series. This is Prairie Mountain, so talking about flying Prairie Mountain. Big reason we're doing these videos really is to increase pilot safety and the safety of people flying in these areas. Right out of the gate, gonna suggest that Prairie Mountain really isn't that great a flying site um, by a lot of standards. So it's not necessarily really a site that would be popular if it was an area with a lot of other sites nearby. First thing we're going to cover, first few things we're going to cover are, yeah, why is it a more challenging site? Maybe not such a good choice to fly in certain conditions or for certain levels of pilot, which of course would generally mean new pilots, people who aren't super current, beginners, etc. It's really not a great site for those types of pilots in everything except for what would be ideal conditions. So a big part of what makes Prairie Mountain different is like the topography and the area around it. There's a few things that just in actuality make it more difficult and make it a challenging place to fly. So we're going to have a look at that. So I have here a map using CalTopo here of, well, I can go wherever we want, but over here on the east side we have the city of Calgary, Canmore. I've put pins on a few of the key flying sites going across the range here. So we have Prairie Mountain, Lady McDonald, Golden, Revelstoke, and Lumbee down here. If we switch to the just relief view, because this is probably one of the biggest factors, is if you I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but essentially if you look at each of these sites across the map, what you'll see is all these sites are on have some fairly flat valleys. So Cooper's, there's a little flat valley right in front of it. Revelstoke, Golden, Lady McDonald, and Canmore have big valley systems running right in front of the sites. And when you look at Prairie Mountain, if we zoom in here even, you'll see there aren't really any large defined valleys. There's lots of very small tight valleys around it. So that's one of the first big factors that makes it a lot more challenging, especially if there's any amount of wind. If there's any amount of wind, there can be a lot of turbulence in these areas. And as far as where you can glide to, you're gliding out to land in these tight valleys around the mountain. In a lot of wind, there is a lot of turbulence, much more so than in these other sites. Okay, especially if we do a comparison from Prairie Mountain over to Lumbee, it's kind of the extreme, and Lumbee has about the same amount of relief, but the hills are a lot more rounded and smooth for one, and you do have the fairly flat valley with all the farms where Freedom Flight Park is and whatnot below, right below launch. So you're flying right out to a nice flat valley. So point two, if we switch over to satellite imagery, it's readily visible at this viewpoint for, say, Cooper's as an example. You can see farms and agriculture, which means you generally have flat fields with not many obstructions, relatively speaking. So again, ideal for landing, learning to fly, etc., that sort of stuff. Yeah, agriculture means flat landings, less obstructions. That's a good thing. When we go across, obviously, Revelstoke doesn't have that, but at least the water makes for a very flat valley there. And you have some landing zones by the water. The whole Columbia Valley from Golden South, there's a fairly high propensity of farm fields. Lady McDonald, you have Canmore Town right below you where there are quite a few green spaces and landing zones. Not as nice as a place like Lumbee or Golden with large fields, but still some pretty good options. And then when we get over to Prairie, this is again a very striking difference. When you start to zoom in, you'll see Prairie really is a lodgepole pine tree farm. There's a lot of trees, and that's something a lot of people notice right out of the gate. Usually, the first time they're on Prairie, if they've never hiked there or flown there before, yeah, all you see is trees, which is why there's a lot of, relatively speaking, fairly frequent tree landings for how few flights there are there, and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, as you zoom in, there are no farms. There's like well site pads for oil and gas. Again, they have obstructions on them. You can see clear cuts where they've done some logging and stuff. Those mostly aren't landable. They're not flat. There's slash and all sorts of obstructions in them. No farm field within a launch from Prairie without thermaling out and getting at least 1 to 2 climbs away to the east, which introduces other problems. So you're landing in unimproved fields and areas in Prairie. So huge difference over flying in Revelstoke, Golden, Canmore, or Lumbee. Any flying site, actually, any of the core flying sites were in Western Canada that a lot of people fly. And when we zoom in, actual LZ here, so it's this field right here. So again, we're looking at it from the satellite view. We'll switch to some other views. It's not flat. It's got a highway that can be quite busy quite often in the summer, especially on weekends. Right beside it, you've got the Elbow River as well over here, which is fairly fast flowing. You definitely would not want to put a glider in the water there. That sort of thing. So you have this narrow valley with a lot of obstructions around you and your landing zone. There's a little hill here beside the landing field, so I'll point that out more detail. I refer to it as landing field hill. So it's a pretty steep hill. It's got some cliffs on the edge. We can ridge sword in certain conditions even. So again, your landing field has a bunch of stuff around it you have to be paying attention to. And it's not flat approaching into this field. So those are the most obvious things. If there's anything you take away from this, it's to pay attention to these pieces. These are the reasons why Prairie is really not a good site overall compared to other places we fly, and especially for new pilots. It's very challenging in all but the best conditions. So, what are the best conditions for Prairie? For flying Prairie Mountain, best conditions for new pilots, well, really for anyone, is flying in the winter and in relatively light winds, calm conditions. So stable air, maybe lightly soarable with wind in the winter. So the specific reason I'm calling it winter time is the road is closed in the winter. So it closes December 1st up until, I believe it's May 1st is when the gate opens, or might even be May 15th actually. So I'll correct that in the video, put that on the screen. But so when that road's closed, we can land on the road. So that actually does improve your landing options dramatically. So that's something to take into account. So yeah, for newer pilots and people first flying Prairie, I generally recommend, yeah, if they don't have a lot of flights, you should be flying it in the winter when you have the road to land on. One, it gives you a nice big long almost infinite landing strip, and you quite often it's snow covered as well, so if you mess up your approach or go downwind, it likely actually doesn't matter. It's usually pretty slippery and fast for sliding in on. So having the road to land on in the winter makes a significant difference, makes it a lot easier. Okay, so some other points about Prairie we'll go over is just a general overview of the area. looking at the area around Prairie, so I'm just going to go over some of the key landmarks. Yeah, we have uh, 3 parking lots now. So there's Elbow Falls, which has a trailhead for the hike right in the starting from the parking lot. There's the Beaver Ponds parking, or it's called the Beaver Lodge Trail, which is right off the highway. So, and then right beside that is the Powderface Creek Trailhead as well. So there's 3 parking lots, all of which give access to the trail, the landing fields just down the road from them. So if we zoom out, a few key landmarks. So Prairie Mountain itself, uh, there is this little ridge here in between before the road and before the landing field hill. So this little ridge is called White Buddha. If we zoom in enough, you can see on the trails here, it's calling it White Buddha. So it's a very important landmark when you're on launch quite often. The little ridge right above the landing field, I just refer to as the landing field hill. You've got a few different creeks. So there's Prairie Creek, which is the one right below Prairie Mountain. There's Powderface Creek, which is between White Buddha and the landing field hill. On the north side, we have Canyon Creek, and north of Canyon Creek is Moose Mountain. So it's a big mountain with lots of different summits and ridges coming off of it to the north of Prairie. That's the general area with Highway 66 and the Elbow River kind of to the south. Out to the west, Powderface Ridge is to the west, and you can see the Powderface Trail and Highway 66 wrap right around it actually. Okay. Again, this is all closed in the winter, that section of road. So yeah, so that's the obvious ridge you stare out when you look from the southwest of Prairie. You look across. Okay. And that's the general area around Prairie Mountain. The one thing Prairie Mountain does really have going for it, well, the 2 things. So after I say it's not a great flying site, it does get flown quite often, so quite frequently. The reason it gets flown so frequently is its proximity to the city of Calgary. It's only about a 45-minute drive from a lot of areas of the city, and it's got a really good hiking trail that's heavily used. So it's kind of like the Grouse Grind, for anyone who knows that in Vancouver, of the Calgary area. It's where a lot of people go to do laps, train year round. It gets hiked probably every day of the year. Not probably, it does. Unless maybe there's some crazy exceptional weather event. So even in the winter, it's packed down. It's easy hiking in the winter. It's accessible. It's close to the city, and the launches are generally really good for totally unimproved area. Right? We haven't done any work to create launch spaces up there. We don't need to. It's nice grassy launches, so we always have to deal with that. But for the most part, we have nice grassy launches up there. So, and we can launch in almost all directions. So it's easy to get to. It's easy to get up from a hiking perspective. It's got pretty nice launches that give you some flexibility for different directions. But landings, right? So that's what we first spoke about, was tight valleys, lots of trees, no big flat fields, all those things. So the key part of going flying is landing safely. It really is. So that's what makes it so much more challenging. Okay, so some of the tips for flying Prairie. So again, I'll mention, keep harping on this, Prairie Mountain does not have great landings. But there are landings pretty much on all sides of the mountain and that sort of thing. Again, a lot of these aren't super obvious when you're on launch. So you do really need to fly with like a cross-country mindset and be able to pick out landings from the air and understand where you can get to and how you're going to set up in these areas and that sort of thing. So if we zoom in on the mountain, I originally pointed out like Canyon Creek to the north, the Prairie Creek Trail and valley below, Powderface Creek. All these valleys, as tight as they are, do have landings in them. So as much as it might be hard to see from launch especially, but even sometimes when you're in the air, depending where you're at, they all do have landings. You just got to look for them. Most of the time there are actually meadows in the very bottoms of some of these valleys that are landable. So from the mountain top, if we go back to global imagery, zoom in on the mountain, so you'll see there's this big southwest face here. So Prairie Creek down the bottom. There's all these little meadows down here. So there's one here, one over here, over here, big ones over here. Okay, those are all landable. The ones closest to the mountain are the hardest, not the greatest. The one out here, which is about the same glide as it is out to the highway to the regular landing area, is actually pretty big. It's in some cases probably better than the regular landing zone. It's about an hour's walk to 40-minute walk, depending how fast you go, down the trail back to the trailhead. So that's the other benefit here is if you do outland, for the most part, anywhere you can comfortably land and it's like a good place to land, you know, you land in a grassy meadow, that sort of thing, in the valley bottom, there's either a road or a creek, like a trail, actual hiking trail, very close to you. So all these valleys have hiking trails in them. So there's no need to panic and think you're out in the boonies. In most cases, it's a relatively pretty quick walk back and easy to the road and to where the cars are parked. People do see off the north side in Canyon Creek those roads down there. So most of the time, those roads are inaccessible. They are gated way up close to the parking lot, which is the Ings Mine parking lot over here. That road wraps all the way around, goes up into the Moose Mountain. So this is for oil and gas. That road is landable all down in that valley. And again, it's still not a very far walk out to walk back to the parking lot over there. So there are options. There's this well site pad out to the east. You can land on the edge of that or on the road up there, even it's kind of flat. There are lots of places. So for launching in Flying Prairie, okay, stats wise, yeah, it's like a 3-kilometer hike up, 700 meters ish of elevation, and it's about a 5-to-1 glide out to the regular landing field. So with that kind of glide, which isn't huge, it's easily makeable in almost all reasonable conditions. So you still have to be a little cautious. So you don't have elevation to scratch super low off of launch. So that's why the preferred flight path from launch is always to move to the south. The south face, if there's any amount of sun and heating, that's usually where the house thermal is as well. So it makes sense if you launch from the summit or you're up near the top to fly south, whether you launch on the east side or the southwest side. Make your way down to the South Bowl if you're not going up, because one, you're flying towards where your landing field is, and two, that's most likely where you're going to find lift, especially if it's thermal lift we're looking for. Because you are up on top of a mountain, you can choose which side to launch on. You can launch straight north to the northeast, east, southeast, west. It's getting to be kind of cross. Southwest is straight down the southwest face. South, southwest, that sort of thing. So almost every direction works really well. So the one direction that doesn't work great is northwest, kind of west northwest, and that's because that side of the mountain is a lot kind of shallower because of the just terrain features. It creates more rotors, that sort of stuff. So, and there's also trees kind of in the way when you're pointing in the one direction. That's the one direction really that doesn't have good clean air to launch into, and that sort of thing. So this is one of the other challenges I hadn't thought of before until recently, talking with some other newer pilots to the area, is most places people fly, you don't have that many options for launches, at least in Canada, in the mountains, in Western Canada. There's usually a launch cut out of the forest somewhere, and you have to wait for conditions to be good to use that launch, or within reason to use that launch. And having all these launch options at Prairie means you need to make a choice of the right launch to use. And that choice will have a huge impact on how your flight goes. So the biggest rule of thumb is always launch into the medial wind. So, which can be kind of tricky to discern if it's light and there's thermals kicking off. So again, that's why like flying midday or in thermic air can be challenging. So always launch into the medial wind, and most of the time, if that medial wind or there's wind coming up the east side of the mountain, it means launching to the east, which a lot of people tend to want to avoid because it's all the east launches are pretty much cliff launches. They're good cliff launches, and it's a great way to get into the air, but it does intimidate a lot of people, especially new pilots. So the west launch is commonly the west and southwest face launch, which is super nice grassy non-cliff launch. Is usually how people have lulled themselves into launching in lee side conditions, and lee side conditions at Prairie are super sinky because you're on the top of the mountain. So you can get into the air, but that's often what causes people to end up in the trees because they can't even glide out to the road or to the normal landing field. It's just when you're up there, making sure you're choosing an appropriate launch for the conditions and recognizing that conditions change. So if you get up there and you hang out for a few hours or whatnot, again, yeah, it's dynamic. The weather's changing, things are always shifting. So making sure you choose the appropriate launch is super, super important. Okay. Okay, so yeah, of course, didn't film my outro, so yeah, this is an add-on just to the end here. So you've made it through so far the intro to flying and Prairie Mountain flying guide, which is great. There's two more pieces I'm just going to add on here, just very briefly. So the first one is Airspace, which I'm not going to go into all the details or hardly any of them for Airspace because it does change. And as pilots, that's something you need to be aware of, checking the airspace maps and know what's going on because, yeah, it's not something that's static. The most basic piece is that the airspace ceiling right over Prairie Mountain is 12,500 feet. There is commercial traffic flying just above that often, passing overhead. So yeah, that's the ceiling of the Class E airspace, which also with it being Class E, that means, yeah, you are supposed to have your Hagar. It's Hagar required territory to be flying at Prairie Mountain. So I'll probably do a video about getting your Hagar and ways to go about doing it, etc. later on. But yeah, so there is airspace. It's not 12.5 everywhere, so you need to be aware of it when flying at Prairie Mountain. The other one is just weather. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Weather Underground station funded by the Alberta Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association. So it's almost at launch. It's right up near the summit of the mountain. And the best way to view it is on Weather Underground. So if you go to Weather Underground to check it out, on their map view, you'll see there's a little station on top of Prairie Mountain. And what's great about it is you can click through into the details page and see all the daily information. So often we'll just be scrolling down to like these wind graphs. So they will show you gusts and wind direction, etc. For example, today we can see that, this is almost real time, so it's super beneficial, obviously. The other one is the Nikiska Ridgetop Weather Station. So showing it to you here, this actually works much better on a mobile phone than on my desktop here. So this is, you'll see this isn't Environment Canada, this is the University of Saskatchewan has a bunch of hydrology weather stations throughout the Canadian Rockies with snow data they're collecting and weather data. So in this case, this one is super helpful because it is right up on top of Nikiska, right beside the Environment Canada station. I find this one actually updates more reliably. There's about usually an hour and a half of lag in getting results out of this, but it's the more consistent of the two. And in this case, we can see the last reading on the wind speed, which has this little dial, is way up into the red at 10 meters per second, which is like, I think like 35K an hour, getting close to 40K an hour. good rule of thumb actually is that little dial, which does adjust itself either way. In the green is generally very low wind speeds, and once it's into the yellow, you need to start paying attention. So yeah, those were the two add-on pieces I wanted to go over. Just the wind, those sites, which I will link to in the video description, etc. And that reminder about airspace, because yeah, that's key in a lot of areas we fly in Canada, especially anywhere that's remotely close to major airports and that sort of thing. So yeah, if you made it this far, you finished up the video, thank you. Obviously post it in the comments if you have questions or comments, etc., that sort of thing. And I've got a list of these I want to get done. This is the first one because Prairie Mountain probably has some of the least amount of information out there on it. And there's always lots of questions when people are getting into flying in the area about specifically the site because it's so accessible. Okay, that's going to be all. And yeah, we'll get this up. And yeah, thanks for watching. See ya.